Inclusive teaching, supporting all students in the college classroom. 3 levers for student motivation.
One of the ways we see bias and disinclusion in the classroom is around the idea of student motivation. Sometimes instructors tell us that their students seem distracted in class, they aren't doing assigned readings or doing well on exams, or students have stopped coming to class altogether.
These concerns are often based in instructors' assumptions about what their students find motivating, or about how their students' cultural backgrounds influence their motivation to learn or perform well in school. Many of these assumptions are based on harmful racial, gender, class, and cultural stereotypes.
What we try to help them understand is that there are several factors that impact students' level of engagement and motivation, and that the instructor's behavior has a large impact on students' motivation to achieve the learning goals. Understanding how these factors interact can help us to examine our assumptions about student motivation and whether these assumptions are incorrect, less nuanced than the reality, or based on implicit biases.
Student motivation can be thought of as relying on 3 levers that instructors can use to varying degrees to help motivate students. All of these levers are important, and disregarding any can influence students' motivation levels. They are 1. The learning goal the students are trying to achieve, 2. Students' belief about whether they can achieve the desired outcome, and 3. The level of inclusivity and support in the classroom. First, students need to value the goal they're trying to achieve. Instructors generally set course goals or learning objectives before the class starts, and we recommend that instructors review these goals with students to explain why they've chosen the goals or objectives they have in the course. You can establish goals based on knowledge, skills, or attitudes that you want your students to learn over the course of the semester.
Instructors create the goals in the course for students to learn a particular skill or develop knowledge because they or their disciplines place value on that knowledge or skill. How students see the value of what instructors teach might be different than how the instructor sees it. Applying an inclusive teaching perspective to this idea means not making assumptions about what your students, their families, or their communities value. It also means not being dismissive of the value students place on their education. Ask your students about their goals for your class and for their education. The information you collect may surprise you. Use the information you gather to reflect. Where do my goals for my students align with theirs? Where do they not? You can use your knowledge about students' goals to help you refine your own goals for the course in the future and to be clear with students about what you've established as course goals.
And we have one additional suggestion related to communicating learning goals and their value to your students. As an expert in your field of study, you have awareness of the value of some things students need to learn that they may not yet see. For example, you may know that students need to master a particular skill because it's one they need in more advanced coursework or that they'll need in their future professional careers, but they may not realize that's the case. Making that value and its later use clear to students may help them recognize the value in learning the skill. If students seem unmotivated or confused about a task, ask yourself, are there ways I can make the value of my learning objectives clearer to students, or integrate more of my students' goals into my learning objectives?
Second, motivation hinges on whether students believe they can achieve the desired outcome or have high self-efficacy. When students believe that their actions will create the outcome they want, for example, that studying for an exam will yield a higher grade, students are likely to have higher levels of motivation. Conversely, if students believe that their actions will have no impact on their performance, for example, if an instructor tells students that no matter what they do, many of them will fail the course, it will have a demotivating effect on students. As you learned in Module 1, taking a growth mindset approach means demonstrating to students that we believe they all have the capacity to improve and learn. It's very important that instructors set the expectation early that they believe all students can succeed in the course, and that they are supportive of all students as they progress toward achieving the learning goals in the course, as well as their own personal learning goals.
And we've talked about the third lever, the course climate and environment, extensively in Module 1 of this course. If you need a refresher, or if you haven't started that module yet, we encourage you to head back there and learn about the value of a positive course climate. As a reminder, the key takeaway is that whether students feel valued, included, and that they belong in their classes can greatly impact student learning as well as their level of motivation.
Information processing is when the brain is taking in new information, particularly inert facts and figures, and turns that into usable knowledge. That usable knowledge happens when the student is chewing on that content, talking about it, applying it, thinking about it, using it in some way so that it integrates with their social and cultural background, integrates into their larger schema. And it becomes really important because it impacts the student's ability to do even more rigorous work down the road. If the student has internalized an explanatory story that says, I'm not capable, or someone has told them they're less than or not as smart, then it becomes more difficult for the student to actually lean into and process that information. This is what Carol DeWitt talks about as the fixed mindset. So being able to process information is directly connected to what we think about ourselves as learners. So it's certainly the social identity of the student, that learner identity becomes very important. And then there's the cognitive aspect. Who I think I am as a learner is going to influence whether I'm an independent learner or dependent learner. And we want students to be moving toward independent learning, and that is an identity. All of the identities that a student brings into the classroom have to align with them seeing themselves as capable. And that is really the task of the instructor, to create that sense of belonging and connection, not just for the social aspects and the relational aspects, but so the student feels confident and intellectually safe to do hard work.
Learning scientists define cognitive load as the total information processing demands of each task that we're asking our students to do. One thing about the cognitive load is that it is so easy for us instructors as experts to underestimate how heavy that load can be for students. That is because with the development of expertise, one thing that happens is automaticity. Our tasks become automated and they take less and less attention for us to perform well. We say, in fact, we can do something in our sleep, signaling that we don't really need to pay that much attention. But when students are starting out in the field, it takes a whole lot more energy to handle very simple tasks. And so one strategy that comes out of that literature is the idea of scaffolding, bracketing and isolating specific skills that we want our students to practice without all the other elements that would bring more complexity into the task. And then gradually, once they start to master that one specific skill, bring everything else and work on the integration of all the little sub-skills. That is the general theory. The principle is to reduce load as much as we can. But actually, we need to be careful because we don't want to reduce all load because a lot of the cognitive load is germane to the task. So reducing that kind of cognitive load is basically tantamount to lowering our standards, and we don't want to do that. But we need to think about the load that is extraneous to the situation. So for instance, if in a discussion class, some LGBT students are trying to monitor their speech because they don't want to inadvertently out themselves, and they're monitoring their words and their pronouns and the stories that they tell, that means that they're using cognitive energies on the side that take away from the main task of focusing on the content. Now, we cannot come out for our students, obviously, but we can work to create an environment where people feel more free to be themselves. Another example that I can give is when we inadvertently embed speed in our tasks. So for instance, when we always call on the first people to raise their hands, that is creating extra cognitive load in the sense of how fast can we perform under pressure. And some students are socialized to perform well in that modality, and some other students are not, and in fact are discouraged. They are encouraged to step back and make room for other people and work communally. And so if I'm always rewarding that kind of behavior, it creates extra obstacles for certain students, and that maps onto gender, and that maps onto certain cultures that are more communal in how they interact with each other. Now, it's important sometimes to actually be fast, but we need to recognize when that is important and when it isn't. And so a strategy that comes out of that is to have everybody think for a second and write things down, and then call on different people. And so now everybody has had time to gather their thoughts, and I have removed speed from the equation.
When instructors come to us and say that their students seem disengaged, or they've received student feedback that indicates that the material is too hard, or that students don't understand why they're doing the work the instructor has assigned, this is often the result of one of two problems. First, students may not see the value of what they are learning. Second, they may feel their actions have little impact on whether or not they succeed in the class.
Another scenario we often see is when students seem distracted or appear to be doing the bare minimum to get by in the class, which can be a frustrating situation for faculty. These students often don't see the value in the goal, no matter how supportive or inclusive the environment.
In both these situations, we ask the instructor to reflect upon whether they've clearly communicated the learning goal and their perception of its value to students. We might ask whether the instructor has a clear understanding of their students' goals and whether students' goals are aligned with the course goals. We might also ask the instructor to collect feedback on students' confidence levels with the course material and in their progress toward meeting the course goals to see if students' views are in alignment with the instructor's.
And if instructors believe some of their students lack confidence, have very low levels of motivation, or if they've even stopped attending class or turning in work, this may indicate that students feel as though they cannot achieve the learning goal. When instructors are facing this kind of motivation challenge, we often ask them to reflect upon whether they've created a class environment, either implicitly or explicitly, that has undermined students' confidence in their abilities. We might ask whether they've established a climate that conveys to students that they're capable by treating all students equally with regard to their abilities in the course and demonstrating their support for students throughout the learning process.